Welcome to the Future Hero Podcast. My name is Baxter. Thank you for pressing play. As I mentioned in the previous episode in my interview with Ben Drexler, the number one request that I have been getting is to do more interviews. And since this is my audience is largely artist and flow artist based, I'm going to start with people within the flow arts community. And I want to interview them. It's really because of something that I heard that Ram Dass, he retold, but he has a speech in which he says that one of his teachers recommended that they only read about liberation from someone who is liberated. Otherwise, even the best explanation on how to get to liberation is written by someone who hasn't achieved it. And so, of course, it really limits your reading list. But with that thought in mind, I've been wanting to interview people that have actually done it. And what I mean by done it is sustained themselves off of their art form or taken a big leap and actually have proof of that effort. And with much excitement, I am going to welcome in Spiral today. Spiral and I go way back, and I think most of you know her. When I posted about this interview on Facebook, I think there were about 150 likes or so on this idea. And if you don't know who Spiral is, she is a performer of stage and festival and just about every type of venue that a performer could be in. She has been a flow artist, and then quite some time ago, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, she transitioned into including more circus arts, more traditional things. She does, she can tell you all the different things that she does, but she's multi-talented for sure and multi-skilled. I must say that Spiral is one of the hardest working performer people that I've been around, which I know that's pretty psycho work ethic in that community, but she, compared to just the regular flow arts world, she definitely brings like a rigor to it and has really thought about it. And so I'm really curious to hear what she has to say about it. We're going to try to talk about a lot of things, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on hooping, at least not more than half of our time on hooping. And then we'll try to pick this up in another podcast and get a little bit more hooping specific. So, Spiral, welcome from Berlin. How are you?
Oh, I'm great, Bax. What an intro. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I mean every word of it. I guess I should give us a little bit of context. We know each other going back from, I think, early 2002, although you were kind of introduced to me in my life in 2001 because you gave Julia, you let her borrow your giant hula hoop. And that brought hooping into my life. And then you've been, you and I have been hoop buddies ever since. And I think, I'm not exactly sure about the year, but at some point you decided that you wanted to focus full-time on performing. And I decided that I wanted to go full-time into teaching. And you went your way and flowered into something amazing. And, and I went my way. So that's our history. And I'd love to hear like a little bit of your history. Like, what's your take? What's your origin story with flow?
Oh, goodness. Well, yeah, the origin story, it's funny. I guess it all started with a hoop, just like you. In 2001, in July 17th, actually, I was able to go back and look it up. July 17th, 2001 is my hoop anniversary, when I first came across a hula hoop at a string cheese incident show, because I was definitely full on hippie at that point and had been following Fish and stuff a little bit. And someone else had told me about this band. And interestingly enough, oddly enough, I went to go check them out in Rockingham, North Carolina. They were performing at a racetrack, which is about as southern as it as southern as it gets. And of course, being symbolically inclined, I also get a little kick out of the fact that it's this circular, track and venue. And it is about 15 minutes from my grandmother's house on my dad's side, like in the deep, deep South. So I went to this show and I saw these people spinning gigantic hula hoops. And I had always been drawn to dance, and I was immediately captivated, and found the guy who was selling them and requested the biggest one that he had. And so it was a little bit over 5 feet in diameter and probably about an inch and a half thick, the tubing with water inside.
That is
So it was
crazy.
a huge,
Heavy as shit, right?
huge implement. But it definitely facilitated a lot of very easeful and relaxed flow. So I was immediately taken with it. And yeah, so that was midway through the summer of 2001. And later that year, I had been kind of going to a lot of music festivals. And it was in October of that year that I met Julia Hartzell, who was very dear to both of us. And she came up and introduced herself. She was taken with the hoop as well. But what really solidified the connection between she and I was the fact that after that festival was over, I had really loved the DJ Shadow set, and I saw that he was performing in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is actually your roots.
Right.
So many interconnected things,
Yeah,
you know.
for sure.
So I drove down to see DJ Shadow, and lo and behold, Julia was also at the show because she had also dug it, and then we realized we had both independently driven, you know, from the Chapel Hill area to Charlotte to see this DJ, and we became fast friends from then on. And she was totally into the hoop and introduced you to the hoop. And yeah, it's all so lovely.
Nice.
So lovely. Interwoven. Yes.
Yeah. When did you, I mean, not, you don't need to give me exact dates, but how long did it take before it like hooping became a thing?
Well, it's interesting. I definitely took to it very, very quickly. And it was kind of with me all the time throughout that summer in 2001. But it was, I believe, April of 2002. I had embarked upon this 14 months of world travel. And I had an amazing travel buddy, this guy, Ohm. And it's funny, I think it's the last time I have ever traveled without a hoop. was in 2001 in this 14 months of travel. And during the course of this time, this man that I was traveling with, he was very odd bird, very, very outside of the mainstream. And he inspired me in a big way to never want to work sort of the 9 to 5 gig, you know, and I had already been doing a lot of, you know, customer service, waiting tables, bartending, this kind of stuff. But he really instilled in me this idea, like, I can't live the standard life. And I was wondering, what would it be? What can I do that's different? And then when I got back to the States, in 2003, after all of this amazing transformative travel, I dove into the hoop again. And in the time that I had been gone, and this is so funny to think back on now, in the time that I had been gone, Julia had also really taken to the hoop and had been making them. And she had learned from Miss Saturn at a show how to take it from your waist overhead. You know, this was a huge breakthrough.
Yeah.
So when we had this moment of coming back together and she showed me this one trick and all these things started to unlock, and then I thought, well, this is what I'm good at. I should just run with this for a while, you know. And there was, of course, also, especially when you're just starting out with the hoop and starting the cottage business, making and selling hoops is a way to kind of, you know, quick cash and stuff like that. Well, not quick, but there's a lot of work involved, but it is a way to sort of help sustain yourself. So I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I had a natural sort of affinity for the dance and for the flow. And she and I moved in together and we started crafting hoops like crazy, you know, going out to events, going to Weaver Street Market where, you know, there was a big part of our shared hoop history
For
also.
sure. Yeah.
And yeah, it kind of took on a life of its own. And it was definitely a few more years that I was still hustling, you know, with waiting tables. And then for a while it was doing tree work also to supplement my income. But I had a pretty big break, so to say. Later in 2003, I was sort of casually performing at a festival, and this guy came up to me and, was totally enthusiastic, completely blown away. This guy, Hardin Minor, who has been a hugely transformative person in my life, much like you.
Absolutely.
And he said, "Hey, have you ever thought of choreographing? Have you ever done this, more professionally in a corporate setting?" And and that was sort of the beginning of my more formal performance career.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then, do you remember when you adopted the name Spiral?
Ooh, I wouldn't remember except for hooping.org's name registry that they had back in the day, because hoop names were such a big deal back
Oh,
in the
that's
early
so right. I
days.
forgot about that.
It's Hoopalicious and Hoop Girl, and I was kind of obsessed with this idea that I needed a name. And so I was mulling it over and mulling it over. But I think because of the influence of these other names, I was leaning a little bit more towards I mean cheesy in the nicest way possible, but I was a little more, towards this end. And then when I saw one of the first images of me spinning a fire hoop, it was a long exposure, so I could see the trails were kind of this double helix sort of shape, and I immediately thought, Spiral. Yes, that's the name. And it was around, May 2004 is when I registered the name on hooping.org, but I think it was a bit earlier that I chose it.
Right on. Well, I'm going to maybe catch you a little bit off guard, but you just brought up something that I'd like to get your thoughts on, and you can take a minute to think about it. But I really think that one of the things that non-performers sometimes don't realize is part of the function of a performer name. And I think it has, of course, many functions, but I think one of them is for the performer themselves, because their name becomes kind of a vehicle to a character that they are. Does that make sense? It's like when they get on stage, they're not getting on stage in the name that they were given. They are stepping onto stage in the person they want to be, in the sort of highest representation of themselves. You know what I mean? The flawlessness of being a flawless performer. And I wonder if you have any thoughts like that? Does that resonate at all? Is there a difference between, Spiral and you as you are in the day to day?
That's a great question, and a good observation. But it's also kind of telling as well of how just green I was, I think, when I chose it. But it's also part of the divine flow of this entire path. You kind of, once you make the choice for this alternative path, this artistic life, your eyes ideally are a bit more open and things start, making sense in different ways. But when I chose the name Spiral, it literally was such a visually triggered thing that I just had no idea the depth of it. So to get back to your question, now it has much more meaning for me, because I went on this whole research journey of spirals, and the ubiquitous nature of them throughout the universe, from the micro to the macro. And the fact that patterns of growth and the swirling of the stars and all these things, I just had no idea. I mean, Fibonacci, there are so many different paths to go with this specific spiral idea. And the fact that it repeats in so many different ways in this steady ratio, in art, in nature, in everything, that it became sort of a little bit of a proof of divinity once I went down the path of researching it. And so then, of course, it had much more meaning for me overall. However, I mean, my gosh, I've had the name for so long now that at this point, there's not, it doesn't feel like there's that much of a separation between quote unquote Vivian and Spiral. And being from the South and having worked in the South for so many years, it's even more common that I get the question when I'm there, oh, well, what's your real name? When I introduce myself.
Right.
which I have to admit always rubs me a little bit
That
wrong
drives me
because
crazy.
it's come on, it's like my real name is whatever I choose to introduce myself as. But depending on the energy of the asker, I'll always, delve in a little bit more. But
Mm.
when I moved to the Bay Area in 2009, I think because of the nature of the Bay, people were much more, almost everyone called me Spiral.
Hmm.
They were into it. It became such a thing that the separation between any kind of two identities sort of dissipated. But there is definitely something to, yeah, this kind of higher ideal with it. There's something that transcends the mundane and something that goes a little bit deeper. So
Yeah.
yeah, I hope I can embody it, and it's one of the things that makes me smile big is when someone has seen me do what I do, and then they come up and introduce and we talk, and then they ask me my name, and they say, "Oh, that makes sense." Because they've seen what I'm doing. They're like, "Oh, of course, well, that's
Right.
the perfect thing." Yeah.
Right, right. So, for those of you that are listening, Vivian lives in Berlin, and we are doing this through Skype. And so, every now and then, if you're hearing the sound kind of go in and out, Spiral's a very animated person, and every time she moves, it goes out a little bit. She also talks with her hands a lot, which is just like me, which is awesome. But I wanted to, so you would describe yourself as a performer, right?
Yes, yes. At this point, yeah, primarily. It used to be more of performer and teacher, but it's been a while since I taught. Yeah,
Mm.
I've been sustaining myself from performing for quite a while, but I have also been very comfortable living on the verge of poverty for a long time. So,
Right, right.
you know.
Right, 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 right. It's in the podcast that I just did with Drex, we spent some time talking about that sort of commitment to the artistic pursuit, and it really does take a lot of effort, doesn't it? And it's like you get it's funny because you get into the coolest parties, but you also see some really dark places as well, you know?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, my gosh, I mean, the experiences I've had, you know, they're 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 not quantifiable at all. They're
Mhm.
amazing. I've had such a breadth and depth of experience, but I've also lived without a quote unquote home for many years. I've
Mhm.
also, had very little in my bank account for maybe a decade,
Right.
and as with any sort of freelance work, it comes and goes, and you have to really cultivate that uh the faith, and to get into the hippy dippy speak of like manifesting and that it's all going to be taken care of, which is usually true. I can't deny that, I mean, my parents from time to time helped me out throughout the first part of my path when I
Mhm.
really needed it. And that was always a bit of it's hard to be totally proud of yourself when you're getting the occasional handout every now and then. But at the same time, we also live in a society, especially in the States, where patronage and stuff like that is really hard to come by.
Really hard.
Um, so yeah, it's a hustle, and it definitely demands a degree of sacrifice that I think a lot of people are not comfortable making or are not even aware of, because when you see the pictures on Facebook or the Instagrams of she or he is in that place and this that and the other. Of course, they're amazing experience, but there's a lot, especially having been a solo performer my whole career. There's no troupe to rely on. There's nobody there to help me with my luggage. There's nobody, there's a lot of couches to sleep on and this kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I used to say that the loneliest person in the room is the person that's in front of everybody.
Ah, yes, that's a good one. Yes.
It's so funny, especially when you're a solo performer, because you don't, like you said, there's nobody to high five. There's
Mm,
nobody to say good show or, like that from your day to day,
yes.
and yeah, I can. What's like? I mean, I don't want you. I know you don't walk around with a list, but what do you think is one of the like consistent highs of doing what you do? Like, what is
Ooh.
it? Is it the rush? Is it
Well,
completing?
it's funny because I actually my goodness, I still, well, depending on what the gig is, but if it's anything of any degree of importance, like, for example, a festival set, something where I can totally flow and jump on stage, that's, that's the ultimate fun gig where there's no worry. I can totally just channel and have fun with it. But anything else, I definitely still get nervous before I go on stage. There's sometimes the degree of anxiety that I even question why I'm doing this in the first
Right.
place, sort of thing. But I think that the consistent high is especially during my personal flow practice. The states that I reach with the hoop and some of my other flow props, the wand and I do some contact juggling also, but the hoop was my first love, and it's still the thing that gets me the highest, quote unquote, that really connects me to source. And so when I have that feeling, I'm so often immediately struck by the fact that, wow, I can't believe I still love this so much, and this is what I get to do. So it's really good to have those moments, because there are a lot of moments like, wow, this is so much work. The get to do sentiment sometimes gets lost under the,
For sure. For sure.
the hustle.
Well, one of the things that I'm trying to do with this podcast is, give some oxygen and some relief to some of the, to a lot of us that are doing it, because I think that people see us, really honestly in what are peak moments, like when we're doing
Yes.
what we've been training for some of us most of our lives to do. And they base their whole worldview of us on that. And this isn't a negative or like a us against them thing, but I don't know if people always realize, and since there's so many young artists listening to this, that it's not like once you have some success that the anxiety goes away.
Oh,
You
definitely
don't,
not. If anything, it increases.
right? I don't want to be dark, but
The better the gig, a lot of times the more stress that comes along with it. Yes.
yeah, it's really teaching me impermanence. You know what I mean? Because, well, for a while I was on this capitalistic vibe where I just assumed that everything was going to grow. Everything would like grow, but I'm sure as a performer, you've experienced this where you dance to 5,000 people somewhere, and then the next gig there's like 40 people there, and you're,
Yes.
or something, some equivalent to that, it's been, I don't know. It used to be really funny to me because I would teach local classes here, as you know, and then I was building my traveling and teaching. And so I was traveling all over the US and Canada, and I was selling out, thank God, and I would like sell out these workshops, and, they would have been sold out for months and then, or at least weeks. And then I'd come home and there'd be 2 people in class.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you know this story, but the day that I won the hooping.org Teacher of the Year, which was the first time they gave that out, nobody came to my class that night.
Oh no, I did not. I did not know that.
Yeah, it was cruel.
That is the perfect irony. Yes.
Well, let's drop back 1 second. I'm sure people are curious what kind of movement you were into before you found the hoop. Like, were you a trained dancer, yogi
Gosh,
person?
don't I wish? Don't I wish? I came from a very middle class background, and we really didn't have the money for dance classes, although it was something I was completely obsessed with from a very young age. I remember going to the library, and all I would look for were books on dance and mythology. And I think it's so interesting that kind of those two things sort of interwove later in my life, kind of creating my own personal mythology, as you're quite familiar with.
Sure.
Well, cheerleading. Cheerleading was something I did in middle school and high school, and that was probably my first introduction really to performing. I did a little bit of modern dance. The middle school I went to had this sort of program, and that was just, I couldn't get enough of it. But cheerleading, actually the degree to which I was involved with, and you're from North Carolina. I mean, people take their sports pretty seriously. So
Way.
I was quite lucky that the troops that I was a part of they were pretty competitive. So, I learned tumbling. I was stretching pretty early on, so I got my back handspring and all this kind of stuff, and group dynamics and partner acrobatics. So that was one of the first tastes of maybe being on stage. But yeah, more than that, it was just always a desire to dance. I've always loved that. Yeah.
What about performing? Did you have a performing history outside of the cheerleading?
No, not really. I mean, maybe a couple dance recitals in middle school, but that's about it. Yeah.
And did you, what's interesting about setting you up a little bit of backstory about your performing is that, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I remember, so Spiral and I we eventually became kind of hoop buddies and would hoop a lot together. And there was this short period where she came back to town and discovered that I had been hooping, and then she had been hooping, and we would hoop at Weaver Street, but we hadn't really started practicing together, I think. Maybe we had, but it was so early on that I don't think we had. And I remember it was the Carborough Music Festival day.
Yes.
And were walking down towards Weaver Street, and on another lawn was a drum circle, and we were walking by, and I remember the people in the drum circle who you knew were like hollering, or maybe you didn't know them, but they were hollering like, "Come on over, come on over, come on over." And I remember, like, without hesitation, you just walked with your giant ass hoop into the middle of a very small circle. Okay, I had been practicing with you. That's it. I had been practicing with you. This is all coming together now. Because I remember, like, I was kind of surprised at how quickly you went for it, because I hadn't seen that side of you yet.
Oh, I'm all about that.
Yeah. Well, now it's obvious. That was my introduction to it. That, like, I don't think you've ever met a stage you don't like, and I think that's awesome.
It's true. Yeah, I light up. I light up with attention.
Well, I remember you going off, and like I remember going, "Holy shit, where did that come from?" And
it's.
Go ahead.
I saw a post recently that somebody made about that they find themselves practicing alone a lot. They didn't have a tribe where they were, and they were kind of lamenting the fact that they didn't have quite the same energy or feeling when they were alone. And I will say that although absolutely I do, I light up when I realize that somebody's watching, even if it's in an incidental situation. Like here in Berlin, the park culture in the summer is so wonderful and so widespread that I go to practice in the park quite a lot. And, so there it's sort of the audience that's incidental, like people are there, but one or two might watch, and that's great. That's great for a flow practice. But I, as a solo artist, I've practiced alone for so many years, but I still get the same high if I'm just all alone.
Right.
I'll definitely reach the same flow state. But yeah, did I get off topic?
No. How do you practice? How do you set up your practices, or like what's a typical? I'm assuming you do some kind of movement practice every day. Is that correct?
Yes, pretty much every day. And it's funny, I had to smile a bit when you were doing the intro, because I think you said maybe 4 or 5 years ago with the circus arts, but I think that's a bit of a nod to how time flies. But I went to circus school in 2008-9.
Oh, okay.
So it's been
almost 10 years. Okay.
Yeah. That I went with the intention of really solidifying some aerial acts, and also learning how to handstand and stuff. So that had a big influence on my practice. And one of the things, kind of circling back to what you're saying about how people, especially, my gosh, hooping and the flow arts have exploded since you and I started it in such a big way. And I do think that there's so many aspirations for people to be professional teachers, professional performers, and all this stuff. But I think it's a very small percentage of folks who really realize how much work it takes.
Right.
And that's no knock. You can't have any idea of how much work it takes until you're totally in it. But it was very early on in my path as a performer. And now looking back, I realized that I actually had a pretty odd performance path, because the guy who quote unquote discovered me, Hardin, He is an amazing entertainer. He's been a lifelong entertainer, character artist, physical theater, mime, dance, all these things. But he immediately started booking me for corporate gigs. And so from the very start, I was doing corporate work. Um, and now I know that that's actually a very, very odd trajectory because a lot of people, and I was definitely still getting paying my dues in other ways, going out and doing things that were not for pay, and which you need to do when you're very, very first starting out. But so I was kind of in this more high dollar corporate world pretty early. So I saw pretty early, okay, I need to diversify my skill set from just hula hooping, to be as valuable, quote unquote, a performer as possible. And I was very drawn to the aerial arts and other circus things. But, starting as a young adult, you're immediately confronted also with the reality that a lot of people that you're, in competition, for lack of a better way to put it, for these gigs, many of them do come from a circus background or started very, very young. So that was definitely part of the drive, to push as hard as I could. And to diversify my skill set, like I said. And so once I went to circus school and started training these other things, my gosh, it's a luxury for me these days to have a practice that is completely flow.
Right.
Nowadays, I pretty much start every practice with flow, at least 5 to 20 minutes. So that's kind of my warm up, and then deep stretching, and then handstands, and then whatever discipline I need to be training that day, or disciplines, plural.
I want to go back and talk about something because I bet you'd have some insight on it. And it's about this idea of pay versus exposure.
Ah, yes. Uh-huh.
Now, I know that because of all your different things that you've got going on, that you don't really keep up as much with the hoop community like you used to, in the sense of you're not aware of trends as much as you used to be and that sort of thing. And so what has happened, and I'm about to get a little controversial here maybe.
Ooh,
but I'm
not so curious.
Well,
yes.
I'm not trying to be, but I am going to be a little bit of a big brother because I did witness your career path, as it were. And so there's a trend right now that is going on in the hoop community. And it's not that I disagree with it. I want to make sure that's clear before I say this. The idea is that hoopers have been complaining now for years, and it seems to have really built up into this sentiment that they deserve to be paid if they're going to hoop for someone or in front of someone. Okay? And I don't disagree with that per se. What has happened, though, and people, and like if a hooper, especially a popular hooper, writes something, it'll get like 400 likes as far as like, yeah, you should get paid and all this sort of stuff.
Curious. Okay, one element. So is this usually for like a festival gig, or they're hooping with a DJ, or what's the context of them feeling like they should be paid, quote unquote, to hoop
seems to be for festival. It seems to be more of like for the go-go type hoop dancer.
Interesting. Okay.
Or for that type of entertainment role. Like, not that there's type of go-go, but you know what I mean? Like that they will be at a party or something to liven it up or whatever. And so the sentiment has kind of fomented into more just straight up anger and bitterness. And so what happens is someone will chime in on, like, they'll find a hoop group randomly on Facebook, and they'll chime in and they'll say, "Hey, girls or guys, we're having a DJ at this club, and we'd love to get some hoop dancers there." And it's almost like within a minute, it's like chumming the water for sharks. And within a minute, like, hoopers just pounce. And so,
interesting. Okay. Now,
and they're like, "Fuck you! You shouldn't be writing." And I totally get it, but I also wonder if it's actually backlashing, because I know for a fact that my classes were filled up because you were willing to go hoop in front of people in public for free, and people saw you and said, "Where's a local hoop class?" And it was mine.
Yeah.
Yes. And so without, you don't have to get into all my example, but I'm curious, like, So let's bring it on a more positive side. Let's say a young artist person that wants to be a circus performer like you are. What advice would you give them for how often to do exposure gigs versus pay gigs? How to, any advice on when to set your mark and that sort of thing?
Yes. Wow. What a great question and what an interesting topic. Yeah, you're right. I had no idea of that particular trend in the community now. And I have to chuckle a little bit, I must admit, because, okay, for one thing, it's interesting the timing of your question because just maybe a week or two ago, I read a very interesting blog on this topic, and maybe I'll try to find it. So perhaps you can put the specific link in the description.
Sure.
This woman, Laura Whitwer, is quite well known in the aerial dance community. And she had recently written a blog on this topic because I think actually a few years ago she had written the post about with the general sentiment of, hey, don't perform for free. You're hurting the general community because performing for free drives down all the rates and it devalues the art. However, I think there's a parallel in the aerial community and the hooping community. Whereas now the more recent blog was like, hey, actually, you do need to perform for free for a while to get just the basic skills for performing, and to get a little bit of dirt under your nails and this kind of thing. It's a very fine line. And I would say, of course, hooping is even more accessible than performing at an aerial dance level. Right. And the hooping community has exploded in the last decade. So, with all due respect, I do find it a bit laughable. I don't know if that's the right
Ouch.
Word I
think that's a little harsher than you mean.
That is harsher than I mean. Okay.
It brings a smile to your face in a knowing way.
It makes me chuckle. It is absolutely, someone's work and time they put in to something should always be valued. And you should also take into account, of course, the venue, the setting, who is making money off this event, how much money is actually being made. Anytime you're asked to do something for very little to no pay, you also have to factor in the fun for you. Mm-hmm. I think especially in the last 5 or 6 years, like I used to perform at a lot more festivals because hooping and really skilled hooping was more rare. So festivals were willing to pay. Right. Whereas these days, not only has the festival world sort of exploded, but the hooping world definitely has. So it's less and less likely that those places are going to have a budget. However, these days I'm pretty happy for the most part to get in and get a little stipend to go to some of the best festivals in the world, to get a free ticket and be artist camping and maybe a couple $100 and I do one set or two, or two sets. But I wouldn't demand pay to go, see a DJ that I like and hoop. If it was something that I really wanted to do. So you kind of have to weigh the fun factor of it and also kind of at this point in the game weigh how many other people are doing it, I mean, it's tough to say it that way, but I should definitely refer you to this blog. She put it so eloquently because now, there is this fine line between, yes, of course, as artists, we deserve to be compensated. And especially within people's local community, that sort of undercutting and being willing to do things for free really does hurt the greater community. But, for certain things, you sort of have to weigh, do I want to do it? Is this fun? Is there a promoter that's making hella money off this? Or is this just, somebody who would you don't have to do anything, and if you're up in arms about, oh, well, they're asking for, performers, but they don't want to pay, well, then don't do it,
Yeah, I stopped teaching at festivals for free.
Yes.
Many years ago. And I know that, I've at least heard through the grapevine that people thought that was kind of assholey of me or whatever. But, especially at the time I was doing it, I was doing my own gigs, running my own workshops all the time. So to go and teach at a festival was really a for the love moment.
Yes.
because I was going to be spending money instead of making money. And, I'm poor. So it
Yeah.
was, but one thing I'd love to hear your thoughts on too is, I don't think people realize just how you earn when you do finally start getting paid. It's because you've earned it. I think that there's some luck involved for everybody. Like you got lucky when you
Yes.
met Harden and whatever, and
Hmm.
I got lucky through the Hoop Life movie and through other things. But the luck only like opens the door. It's all the effort that
Yes.
really walks through. And can you talk about like that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, even with Harden, he did keep me because he was the one primarily booking me at that time. He did keep me at a certain low, what I know now to be a low pay grade for probably, I don't know, 2, 3 years of the gigs that he was booking me for. And that's totally fair because, quite frankly, I was still pretty green. Um, when I think back to the first corporate performance I did with him, I have to laugh. Oh, bless at what I put out there. But it is kind of that thing of paying your dues. And even during that time, although I was, doing those gigs, I was still going to Weaver Street twice a week for free and hustling hoops for sale and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, especially if you're trying to break into, well, in the US, especially corporate work and corporate events is really the stuff that, you know, uh, one-off gigs per se, where you're basically, it's not a contract. It's you go in there, you do a certain act. Sometimes you have to cater the act to the theme or whatever else. And they can take quite a lot of work, but there is often quite a big paycheck. But those can be fewer and farther between. They can be harder to get. There's so much work on the back end of just marketing yourself, and that's a
Hmm.
whole nother thing. Um, I've always been a soloist, and I have a terribly difficult time asking for help. So I
Hmm.
was totally on this kick of I'm going to learn how to do everything myself. I'm going to make my own website. I'm going to learn how to edit videos. I'm going to learn how to do all this stuff. Um, so there's so much that goes into it, and yeah, there's definitely luck involved, but you also have to deliver because if you
Hmm.
if you get the opportunity and if you get these things aligned, so you get the gig, yeah, hopefully you're still showing up with all the hard work that you've put in to, that will yield more opportunities from that.
Totally. Totally. Well,
Mm,
let's talk about what some of that hard work has achieved, like what you've been working on recently. So, like, if I were to ask you to describe what you've been doing professionally, like
mm.
types of gigs or whatever, over the last 3 or 4 years, what would you say?
Let's see. Well, like I said, I was living in San Francisco in the Bay Area for about 7 years, starting in 2009. And what initially drew me there, well, was hoop technique and all this kind of, the flow art scene, and the circus was really blowing up. But as the time passed there, I learned how difficult it was to be an artist there because it's a very expensive place to live and all this stuff. And so I was still doing corporate work, and I would come back to North Carolina to work from time to time. And ironically, I was getting paid better pretty much everywhere else but the Bay.
Hmm.
So I was still doing kind of this one-off, gigging for the most part. Um, but ever since I came to Berlin, which is where I am now, for the first time in 2011, I was convinced that I wanted to live in Europe. I wanted to live in Berlin. And so one of the things that I did in an effort to, and I will circle back to your original question, but this all
Sure,
kind of leads
please.
into it. But um, I had this idea that I would, and I don't know why, because my first experience making an instructional DVD should have been enough to know that that is something I never wanted to take on again. But
Right.
I got this brilliant idea that along with, the performing gigs that were coming in, I was going to make this instructional DVD in the Flow Wand, and that was going to give me my nest egg to then move to Berlin, right?
Hmm.
And so I put all this time and all this effort into creating this instructional DVD, and then when I launched it, um, And I thought I had been totally realistic in my worst case scenario
Oh
predictions.
God.
But it surpassed my worst case scenario prediction by,
Yeah.
oh God, I don't even have a percentage, but basically it completely tanked. And I had put all this work into it. And this is, part of the life of the freelance artist. But
Right.
that was early 2014. And I had, really put all my eggs and all my time in this basket. And I had reached this very low state of, gosh, starting the question started to creep in, you don't really have a plan B. Is this time to figure something else
Right.
out? The finances are really low. I really counted on this thing and it's not working. And as cheesy as it sounds, I really started getting very, very active with my visualization and with my manifestation. And I had heard a few years before about working on cruise ships. And I had this idea, I was like, God, that would be great, because of course I have quite the travel bug. I always have, and I knew that that sort of work was out there. I thought, oh, I'd really love to get a contract. I've been doing so many one-off gigs. I want a contract, a nice long contract, so I could finally save some money and do the thing. And, gosh, it was about a month and a half after I had really, really started with this intense visualization of, not only did I want to work on a cruise ship, but even thinking about what would be my minimum, per week that I wanted to make off of a contract like that. And about a month and a half into that, and bless her heart, I have no idea if she realizes how much of an impact this had on my life, but Luna Breeze, Shakti's sister,
Yeah.
she tagged me in a post on Facebook of a call out for this cruise ship contract. And of all things, they asked for an aerial hoop video for the casting, which of course I had an aerial hoop act. So I sent that video in, and I got the gig, and the gig was, the number per week ended up being $100 more than what I had kind of set my sights on, And so it was really from this lowest place in my path of being so far into the career of like, wow, is this a sign that it's time to start something new? Where I really became so desperate, and at the same time, so much more diligent, waking up even earlier, starting my day with manifestation, starting my day with visualization, doing all the things, everything I could think of. And lo and behold, this came, and that was a very transformative gig for me. And so I worked for almost 2 years on the ships. And that allowed me to save a little money and to do quite a lot of travel. And it was during this time on the ship that I met this young woman, Sante, who is doing this show on the GOP variety circuit here in Germany, which I'd heard of some years before. And the moment that I heard of this particular variety circuit, I thought, I've got to do that. I've been wanting to live in Germany for so many years. And it was quite auspicious. I met her on my birthday, and then some months later, she sent me an email. Hey, by the way, you have an aerial hoop act, right? Can you fill in for me for this gig? And so last year in May, I did a week for her for this show. And then they asked me back to do another 6-month contract, which is what I'm preparing for now, starting in September. And I did another little bit of it back in January. So right now I'm preparing for this 6-month run from September to March on this variety circuit here in Germany that I've been wanting to work on for a really long time. And it just, it's such an interesting, yeah.
Is it intimidating?
Oh, yes. Yes, it is. I mean, it's amazing, and a bit intimidating. She was not able to do this 6 months because she is got a contract with Cirque du Soleil.
Oh, wow.
So I am fulfilling her
Those
role
are big
in the
shoes
show.
to fill.
Yes, and I'm honored. She's an amazing artist, and so I'll also be doing an aerial hoop act and a hula hoop act in the show. But yeah. So that's kind of what I'm focused on now, and that's sort of what I referenced earlier on. Is like, the higher you go, yeah, the stakes are raised. The cast that I'm with in the show, they're amazing. a
Yeah.
lot of amazing, really, really talented performers, and many of them from a deep circus background, deep circus families and stuff like that. And yeah, I never thought I'd quite be there from my humble hippie barefoot beginnings in 2001, but here I am.
Well, you talked about
Yes.
something. There's two things that I want to unpack that you talked about just now, or just elaborate on, like, or have you elaborate on, but are about the visualization. And
Yes.
I love belief systems and organized and untouched systems of thought and belief. And so I don't wish to get into any kind of debate with you about this, but I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about visualization. And you use the word manifest, and that a lot of people use. You'll hear a lot of talk about visualization, manifestation. Sometimes it's attached to the law of attraction and things like that. But what I've noticed when I start to talk to people is everybody kind of has an individualized, belief in it, or what it actually does. And so could you talk about, even just the first part, how do you visualize? Do you actually see yourself, or do you?
Well, my goodness, there's there's the classic book by Shakti Gawain, I guess, about visualization that I read many years ago. And it's the whole idea of that when you visualize, you've got to get as deep into the actual feeling of the experience having already happened,
Okay.
and as many senses as you can possibly engage. And at the time, and I've employed this throughout my life, but at this particular time when I was at my lowest point, literally my lowest point on the path, and sort of this place of despair and loss of hope, and feeling like I had put so much work in and that I'd made the wrong choice in the focus of my effort. So, yeah, I was really. It was a crisis of faith, basically, but I knew that I wasn't quite ready to give up. And so, yeah, it pushed me to think about what would I really, really want, and why not dream big, So every morning when I got up, I would sit at my altar for a little while and really think about and try to sink in. And I'm not, super, super disciplined, spiritual, like I'm not meditating for half an hour every morning as I probably, quote unquote, should be. But it was definitely at least taking a few minutes to try to sink in as deep as I could to, where would I like to go? How would it feel? How would it feel to be earning a steady paycheck, which is something that I had never really done throughout
Right.
my whole artistic career, and what would the level of relief that I would feel from having this steady income. And it was funny, also how quickly that opportunity came once I really focused myself on that. And you'll probably appreciate this too. Once I had finally gotten everything done, and it was quite a scramble. The gig came very quickly, and then I had to hustle and get a lot of ducks in a row very fast. And once I had done all that, and once I was sitting on the plane flying to Miami to embark on this first contract, the deep feeling of, oh my gosh, wow, I've never felt so just relieved, this deep relief of finally having something like that come through, and sort of a steady income. But yeah, back to visualization and manifestation. I don't know if you feel this way, but part of the whole energy of the hoop, I've joked for years, half joking, half serious, the hoop is a magnet.
Mm-hmm.
The hoop is not only the energy that we stir up with it, which I also believe in some way does create sort of a field around us, but even in a more literal sense, when you take a hula hoop out to a park or to a festival or to whatever, more than poi, more than juggling, more than anything like that, it is something that people of all ages resonate with.
Mm-hmm.
So many of older folks have seen it before. It draws people and experiences to you in a way that other things just don't, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And so that, I feel like, has sort of intensified my ability to manifest things in a way. I don't know if it's just the energetic field that it stirs up, or the sort of chance meetings or the connections that it facilitates, but there's definitely something about that tool in particular. I
Yeah.
think that, yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, yeah, I totally agree. And just would add to that I think that just movement practices in general, I think that one of the overlooked things, because, there are some people that think of movement as exercise. And what I mean by that is, you could put that in quotation marks maybe, because I don't mean like that they think of it as being good for them and whatever, but as like this task, this thing that they need to get done so that they don't look like a fat slob to them. To
Yes.
them, I just added that to them because
Yes. Yes.
you're fighting your inner critic is your harshest, I
Oh
think.
my heavens. Yes.
And I think what's missing in that, and not to opine too much off topic, but I think that one of the reasons we are perhaps at times overly medicated as a culture is because there is a statistical proof that we're moving less as a culture. And so, like, in addition, I don't want to knock any of the specialness off of hooping, but I think a big part of the reason that hoopers have all these life-changing moments is because they get serious about a movement practice. And ironically, they get serious because it's so fun.
Yes, yes, yeah. I'm sure you and I share the opinion. It breaks my heart, especially on the ship. There's a big gym area on the ship. It is basically a floating hotel, and so
Right.
you go up there and they had a couple little movement studios, which is where I always was practicing my art. But then the whole bulk of the gym is all the ellipticals and everything else. And just, it makes me sad for so many people that are kind of slogging through this thing that there's something they have to do, just like you said, versus something that they want to do, and something that gives them creative and expressive fulfillment as well as, a great, amazing workout.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the benefits of the hoop. So, like, I have, as you know, I have an elliptical too.
Yes.
You know what
As
I
soon
mean?
as I said
And
it, I thought it's right
well,
over there next to
no, because
you.
you're right, and well, you're right if I add some specifics, and I think, well, I mean, you're not wrong. When there is a benefit towards, you do get some benefit, physical benefits of peace, serenity, and calm after an aerobic session of being on the elliptical.
Oh, absolutely. You
The
can enter
one,
a Zen zone
right.
and the endorphins and all this.
But I
Yes.
think where you're absolutely right has a lot to do with hooping because let's be honest, when you're on an elliptical, for the last half, you think you're going to die.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? You're saying things to yourself like, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And that's not the most calm place, you know, to
Yes.
speak to, source or something, And I
Yeah.
do think the other thing that's not there is creativity.
Yes.
And that's a big thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about a hoop practice or flow arts practice is if they allow themselves to be. I mean, I've seen some what appears to be not so creative spinners, but if they allow themselves to be creative and they're not just trying to do what they've seen before, I think that outlet of creativity, it enriches life well beyond just the prop spinning.
Oh, goodness. Yes. Yes. Well, and that's one of the funny things, too, about the proliferation of the flow arts and hooping movement over the last decade or more is that, I mean, when we started, YouTube was barely a thing, much less Facebook or Instagram. And it's such a double-edged sword because I feel like there is so much more inspiration. People are sharing their ideas and all this stuff. And there's so much to be learned, but somehow it also overall seems to contribute to this
Yeah.
homogenous sort of
Yeah.
style. People are sort of cataloging the moves, and then a lot of what you see, it is very creative movement, no doubt. People still have their flow and the tricks are still coming out, but there's a sameness to a lot of it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too.
Yeah.
And that might just be, you
That might
know,
just be my
that might just be us dating ourselves
back
as
in
to when
my
we
day.
exactly, but I
Yes.
do think that it was different back then. And maybe because there were fewer of us, there was a real sort of, for a lot of people, there was a real effort to be individual, even though that was going to
Yes.
be, it's hard to maintain your individuality because movements can be done by somebody else. And so it's kind of hard to be the person that only does that move for very long. But that was a kind of a goal in the beginning, was like, if you saw somebody else do it, like you nodded to them and then you sort of worked on it, but you let them have it, kind of thing. But but it definitely, even if you took it, you still wanted to come up with something else on your own. And what other changes have you seen in the hoop community?
Oh, goodness. Well, my gosh, there are myriad changes. Well, for one thing, too, I fear that, I mean, like I was saying, it is something that is such a magnet and people resonate with. I fear that there is, ironically, almost a lack of inclusivity because there are so many beautiful, young, thin women doing it, whereas I think when we were more starting, and even the first 5 or 6 years that we were doing it, I felt like it was a much broader age range. People were still into using bigger hoops. I always want to have a bigger hoop when I'm out because that's how most adults are going to have their taste of success with it.
Yeah.
So I fear that, for example, if I give someone that taste of success in the park and they're really into it and I say, oh, hey, you can actually learn a lot online. Almost everything's out there. But then if they go to their computer and look up stuff online, all they're seeing is, 20 to 25-year-old girls with these very fast moves. I don't know.
No,
it kind of breaks my heart a little bit.
Yeah, it's not as accessible looking.
Yes, exactly. And it is absolutely still accessible, even in so many ways that it wasn't when we started. But I fear that sort of trend maybe stalls a lot of more people these days than we even realize.
Mm-hmm. You know, you've always done a good job of, like how much do you, I don't know, I just feel like you've always done a good job of dancing first and hooping second. That like when you perform, when you do hoop performances, do you choreograph them or do you just flow?
Oh gosh, well.
Or do you like have sections that you flow within?
Sometimes yes, but more and more, I mean, like for example, this act that I'm doing for this this gig coming up, it's highly choreographed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and more, I mean, you definitely need to have a set act.
Yeah.
Or set acts, and certainly there can be structured improvisation within those.
Right.
But yeah, that my time on the ship was really a dream gig actually, because there was so much flow. It was really a lot of ambient performance at a lot of the nightclub events or the daytime thing. I could really just do whatever. Oh my gosh, it was like heaven. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're starting to get a little bit tight on time here, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about flow. I know that's a big sort of open question, but to prime the pump, like just to give you a couple of seconds to think about it, like for me, the meaning of flow keeps changing for me, like the meaning of God or something. Like it just evolves as I get older. It means different things to me, and I think one of the things that it's without going into a long talk about this, flow for me really has related to the expression of my authenticity. Like, and that it's not this like profound type authenticity where there's some like ancient truth buried in me. It's more of just like, I'm just comfortable in my own skin. I am like having authentic experience just by virtue of not being so friggin' self-conscious. And like, when I'm in flow, it's kind of like the absence, I feel the absence of something when I'm really in flow. Like I feel the absence of self-doubt and self-questioning and that kind of thing.
Oh, that's so interesting that you intertwine that into the question. Yes. I mean, oh my gosh, yeah, the state of flow is my ultimate conduit for this sort of feeling like I'm, connected to the infinite web of experience, really like so I feel like I'm so blessed to have many more transcendental experiences than the average, human. The state of flow is something that has completely transformed my life in all ways. And it's the ultimate medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, especially, around this time that I was saying, 2014, there were so many things that happened, 2011, 2012, 2013 that were quite challenging in my path. But when it came to be that I had kind of put all my eggs in this basket of, oh, this is going to be the thing that gets me from point A to point B, and suddenly, I hadn't planned any gigs for the place that I was. So suddenly I was completely without work, questioning my whole path. And then I started to really notice that self-doubt and a lack of confidence was creeping into my flow state.
Mm-hmm.
And it broke my heart,
Right.
because it really, and this circles back too to videoing and stuff like this. I was noticing that every time I put the video camera on, I would completely shut down. And I've seen people, remark on this sentiment as well, as just this idea of like, oh my gosh, well, the video camera, there's an inherent, like, if you have even the thought that you want to post something online, then there's the judgment of the quote unquote world that can come in, much less your own internal judgment of whatever might be happening. So once I started to notice that my precious flow state was being impeded upon with these thoughts of self-doubt, it was heartbreaking. And I've tried to be aware as much as possible in these last years when that's creeping in, and there's not much that can be done in the moment other than noticing it and trying to, kind of pull back and really appreciate, well, like you said, I mean, pure flow is lack of any of that,
Mm-hmm.
and any of that self-doubt or critique or anything like that. And it's a tricky thing when your art is also your income.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, very delicate balance. So of course, like for me, I'm a performer. I'm a solo performer. So much of what I do is being evaluated and critiqued for its worth, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote. So
Yeah.
whether or not I can keep my own, experience of flow as pure as possible, oh man, I want to protect that,
Mm-hmm.
diligently as much as I can, but it doesn't always work. It definitely creeps in. Although on the flip side of that, I have to laugh at, I noticed this early on, and it has stayed true throughout my entire flow experience, is that, I'll be throwing down, I'll be having this great time. But the moment that I acknowledge within myself that, man, this is great, or man, I look like a badass, or man, I'm really killing it, I lose it. Immediately. I will lose the hoop, or I'll lose whatever I'm doing. It is such a
Yeah.
interesting Buddhist sort of,
Right. Right.
humility check.
Mm-hmm. Well, do
Yes.
you I think I'd like to finish up on this. Do you I consider you an extremely spiritual person. But it's, and this isn't a qualifier, but except to say that I feel like you're you're a spiralist. Like you've kind of,
Yes.
you have a spirituality that seems important to you, that is made up of many different ideas that you've heard. But I don't think of you, and please tell me if I'm, wrong about this, but I don't think of you as following like one, like sort of type of spirituality. Is that accurate? Or do you consider yourself
No,
something with a
no, a
name?
bit of a dilettante. Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
in my early 20s, I definitely, probably like many people, sort of. Well, I was raised Catholic, so I've always had a guilt complex, but I've always had very much, yeah, right, very much of a being drawn towards iconography,
Mm-hmm.
and the sort of goddess energy. And so when I became more introduced to the whole hippie world, um, and and actually, circling back, I discovered yoga and the hoop in the same month, in July of 2001.
Hmm.
So this is a very potent time. And so discovering the practice of yoga, oh my gosh, I mean, that opened me
Right.
up to a whole nother branch of spirituality, and so much of the mythology of Hinduism and this kind of thing. And so, yeah, I definitely pick and choose. Um, what resonates and what doesn't. And I try to be somewhat discerning, but really, I think it's all about what makes sense to you and what helps you have a greater awareness and appreciation of life, and
Mm-hmm.
empathy,
Mm-hmm.
empathy and sympathy for others, Yeah, that's all I can hope for anyway.
Right on. Well, let me finish with a couple of simple questions here. One,
Mm.
after a performance, do you like it when people come up and tell you you did a good job?
Oh my gosh, of course.
Right? See, I just want to get that on record
Yes,
because
yes,
I
I
have a
do.
lot of
I do.
performer friends. I have a lot of music producer friends. I have a lot of people that perform or do things in front of people. And I like to ask them that question because they always go, yes. You know what I
Oh,
mean? That I think a lot of
there's
people are afraid,
oh, well, I
that
will say,
like, go ahead.
that like okay, so my least favorite thing to hear after a
Okay,
performance.
that was my next question. So thank you. That's what I asked Ben Drexler this as well. So what's your least
My
favorite thing?
favorite thing to hear after a performance was, "Oh my god, that was so sexy."
Oh,
Because I really have a heart. I mean, you were saying I'm a pretty spiritual person,
mhm.
and yeah, I am, and the hoop has always been a very first and foremost, I mean, that taste of flow, it was a spiritual experience, and it still is to this day. It's something that's very, very sacred to me. And then the states that I reach, I mean, what I'm trying to convey to an audience is that transcendent state and that joy. One of my favorite things to hear is, "Oh my gosh, you looked like you were having so much fun up there. I could feel it,"
Right.
and that going further is also that notion of by doing what we do, we're inspiring others to do what their heart calls, not necessarily to become a hooper or a hoop performer, but they can see that I'm having so much joy doing what I'm doing and getting paid to do that it translates into, oh man, I should be doing what I want to do. So yeah, that was so sexy is my least favorite thing. Uh, and the whole idea, and it happens more than I would like, but men taking the opportunity to come up and touch me
Ooh,
when they were telling me I did a good job.
God, I hate that. I can see why.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, don't come up and touch me or try to hug me, especially when I'm right off stage because I'm just kind of pulsing and emanating energy. And it's just like a little kid with a shiny object. They can hardly even help themselves, but
Right,
yeah, just
right,
don't.
right, right. Yeah, you have
If
to kind of, I guess as a performer, you have to kind of, I don't know, have a force field up maybe a little bit, or
You do, but then
do you?
again, I'm also, I'm also from the South, and I'm a very warm person. I don't have any sort of resting bitch face at all. I'm definitely an eye contact, smiley sort of person, and I'm probably much nicer most often.
Uh-oh. Okay, for folks at home, when you're doing live conversations across the world from North Carolina to Berlin, sometimes things happen and we dropped out during that. But we're back now. Spiral is back now, and we're going to pick up the conversation. I had just asked you, Spiral, about a force field and if you needed one.
Yeah, it sure is helpful to have one. And as a female solo performer, um, yeah, I'm often the only representative, when I'm out and about or when I'm at a gig. And I think we had touched on, post performance specifically when people are coming up to speak or whatever. And oftentimes it's really nice, really warm. But yeah, sometimes men will be totally inappropriate because, especially if I've come right off stage, I feel, and I've seen in the reception that I get. I mean, I'm pulsating. My vibration is very, very high, and I'm probably emanating, well, not only just endorphins and sweat and all of that, but there's definitely. Um, a very powerful synthesis of energy that happens when you're on stage and when you're giving that much out. And I'm a generally very, very friendly person. It's funny because I've definitely had the feedback from time to time that I come off as intimidating, which is so funny to me because I'm super smiley and nice for the most part, which is both good and bad. I'm from the South, and I'm very, very warm. I'm big on eye contact and smiling. Some of my closest friends have resting bitch face, but I don't have any of that, any of that at all. And on the one hand, it does leave me open to certain unwanted energies from time to time. But for the most part, I would say that that aspect of my personality and the fact that, I mean, of course, I do evaluate people quickly in my day-to-day life and hopefully shut down certain things with a force field of some sort. But for the most part, I would say the trade-off between being an open and smiley, eye contacty person has influenced my life, especially being an international traveler as much as I am. A smile and eye contact transcends any language barrier, really. And so when you're going out and about, I would say that the benefits of not having this sort of barrier and wall up to the world far outweigh the costs for me, because they really open up so many more connections and so many more, for the most part, positive interactions with people. So yes, a force field is helpful in all the time, but just being aware and not keeping too much out, I guess. Yeah.
Can you, I don't, apologies if this is a dumb question or not, but I'm wondering like if you could talk about, I don't know, this is one of those questions that may expose more about me than your answer will expose about you. But
my goodness,
I'm curious, I wonder sometimes how I feel like, let me just start this way. I feel like you do a really good job of being attractive in your performances, costuming. I would say that you are aware of your sexuality, but you wrap the package of your performance in a way that's like strong and powerful. And so it's, I don't know. I guess I'm trying to walk a line because I'm really not into like slut shaming and that kind of thing. And I think people should wear what the hell ever they want to wear. But I've wondered, like, if you ever think about that. Like you said earlier in the podcast that you like it when people see your fun and transcendence there. Do you have any thoughts about this?
That's so funny. I was actually no, it's not a stupid question at all. I was just having this conversation the other day with someone, because like I said, I've said it at least once already, but yeah, I am from the South. So I do have a deep, prudishness is not quite the right word at all by any means, but I think a modesty.
A reserve.
Yeah, there's a certain degree of reserve, but at the same time, I'm also very, very, my family from the South would probably laugh to hear me say that, because by the same token, I am the black sheep and so far left and into these alternative societies and ways of living that my family would have they couldn't even conceive of the stuff that I have, seen and lived, but we won't go into that. But yeah, it's, sexiness is totally, sex sells, obviously, and I am a professional performer. I'm trying to market my art. So being attractive in a certain way as a female is unfortunately usually pretty much a requirement in some form or another. But yeah, I feel like it's a bit, I'm not going for that. I'm not shooting for that. And that is my least favorite compliment to get, because I would hope that people would see something more than that, Mm-hmm. And I get that compliment from women and men. I don't want to say it's just men who would come up and say, oh my God, that was so sexy. It's actually just as often women, if not more women, coming up to me and saying that, because sexiness has been placed at such a high value, especially in American Western society. It does break my heart a little bit to see so much. And this makes me sound, I don't know how it makes me sound, but this idea that, the scantily clad presentation is this ultimate, femininity, whereas I don't know, I'm so much more enjoy being a little more, I don't know, elegant in some ways. I haven't always embodied that in my costuming and everything, but that is what I would like to convey in my presence and how I do it. So, yeah.
Well, one of your most famous costumes is that one that you wore at Burning Man several times, and then in the hoop technique demo with the big skirt and,
yes,
it's kind of the opposite of, and I just want to make sure for our listeners, if you don't know Viv and I, we're not in any way saying that things can be too scantily, clad, or that ones can be.
No, not at all.
We're just purely talking as artist style and kind of like the efficacy of delivering a message, right?
Yes, wow, that's so well put. Yeah, it's funny. Oh my gosh, this topic is there are so many layers to it. Uh, yes, I do love this sort of more powerful. I don't know, maybe just regal and self-possessed presentation. Um, and as you said, there's nothing wrong with being scantily clad if that's what you're drawn to. There is there's many years of oppression and such slut shaming that need to be fought against. And so the idea that a woman should be able to wear whatever she wants and not be objectified, I mean, that's absolutely valid and important. And I'm totally in support of the people who they feel drawn to express themselves in this way. I have seen, and maybe it's just me, it does seem to be quite a trend in Instagram videos to be in your underwear, and that's how people perceive that that's how they get likes, and that is how they get likes. You know, there is a big sex does sell and all that stuff, but it does make me a bit sad because it feels like a bit of this, okay, that's what I need to do to be valued. That's what I need to do to, to be liked or appreciated. But anyway, yeah, it's funny that you mentioned this costume. I mean, I was drawn from the very beginning to these big skirts and spinning and really utilizing the aesthetic and the sort of this mystical sort of feeling of these flamenco skirts and sort of the Sufi dervish style. I actually just today got 2 new custom skirts made for this act I'm working on. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited to explore maybe more of those sort of transcendent, mystical, powerful aspects of femininity and how I present my performance personally. Mm-hmm. But I've done the go-go thing too.
Yeah, for sure.
It all depends on what the client wants and how comfortable you feel with it and all that stuff.
Right.
But in my personal expression is just a bit different.
Is that hoop technique demo thing with you in the tunnel? It's amazing, by the way, for folks that haven't seen it. It's amazing.
Oh, thanks.
Spiral goes into a tunnel in the bay, right? Was it in the bay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was like right before either a train or some traffic was coming. Is that right?
Yeah.
You go into this and then...
Yeah. It was a one-way. It was very late where we had been shooting all day, and it was on the way back from this shoot, and it was nighttime, and it's a one-way tunnel in Marin County, north of the Bay somewhere. And we thought, oh, we've got enough time to shoot just a little bit. And so, but yeah, it was a really, really magical moment because we did get oncoming traffic at the very end of the shoot and sort of had to rapidly reverse through the tunnel. Yes, right. To avoid any interaction. That was a pretty amazing piece. There's a snippet of it out there on YouTube and on my website, actually.
Okay, cool. And what is your website?
Oh, what a natural segue. Spiralcircusarts.com, although I'm tempted to tell you to wait and check it for another month until I get the new version up, but that's always the artist's lament.
Right.
I'm working on this new website.
Well, you've got at least a week.
Spiralcircusarts.com. Oh, at least a week. Awesome.
yeah. I just put up an episode today, so you got at least a week before this comes out. And it's really been great to talk to you, Spiral. I really appreciate you taking the time. And like I said, I for you guys at home, I'm right now I'm working on another podcast. I've got about 6 or 7 episodes already recorded of my personal flow story, where I'm interviewing and talking to people about the old school hoop world, and we really just get geeky about hooping for the whole hour. And so I'd love, Spiral, to have you on for that, where we could just geek out.
I would love that as well. I feel like we could talk for hours about this kind of stuff.
Hopefully people will want to hear us. But anyway,
yes.
So that is coming, and maybe we can work that out. And I just want to thank you, and I am so... I feel badass that you're a part of my friend circle and to such a close degree. And
oh my goodness. Well, likewise, Baxter, I tell you, and I've said this to you personally many times, but the things you've channeled have been so dear to me, and belief, strength, grace is something that has gotten me through so much of this life as an artist and the hustle, like almost every day. I mean, I would say at least once or twice a week. That's the mantra when I put on my mark in the morning on my throat is this, because belief is something one has to constantly cultivate as an artist. Yeah,
I think it's the source of all good things. So,
it's true.
well, thank you so much for this talk. Thank you for our friendship over the years. And you know how important you are to me and to my past. Like I said before, the last time you were visiting in town, like, you know, without you and my hoop history, it's just not the same. And I wouldn't be in this point right here. And so thank you just for everything that you've done and this walk that we've gotten to share.
Oh, Baxter, you're filling me with warm fuzzies.
Good.
Yes, the feeling is quite mutual. Thank you.
Well, right on. Well, you hang on the line for a second. And folks, thank you for listening to this podcast today. If you like what I do, I'm going to try to do more of these interviews. I really enjoy doing them. And I really think that some of this stuff should be recorded by people that have actually done the stuff that we're talking about. If you do dig what I do, you can like, share, comment on it, subscribe, follow, just anything that you can do to help me spread the word would just be a huge way to show your appreciation. I'll be back next week with another interview. Thank you so much for listening and have a rocking week.